Dido and Aeneas is an opera in a prologue and 3 acts, written by the English Baroque composer Henry Purcell with a libretto by Nahum Tate. The dates of the composition and first performance of the opera are uncertain. It was composed no later than July 1688, and had been performed at Josias Priest's girls' school in London by the end of 1689. Some scholars argue for a date of composition as early as 1684. The story is based on Book IV of Virgil's Aeneid. It recounts the love of Dido, queen of Carthage, for the Trojan hero Aeneas, and her despair when he abandons her. A monumental work in Baroque opera, Dido and Aeneas is remembered as one of Purcell's foremost theatrical works. It was also Purcell's first opera, as well as his only all-sung dramatic work. One of the earliest English operas, it owes much to John Blow's Venus and Adonis, both in structure and in overall effect. The influence of Cavalier's opera Dido is also apparent. Background and context. Before Dido and Aeneas, Purcell composed music for several stage works, including 9 pieces for Nathaniel Lee's Theodosius, or The Force of Love, and 8 songs for Thomas Durfee's A Fool's Preferment. He also composed songs for 2 plays by Nahum Tate, The Sicilian Usurper and Cuckold Haven. Dido and Aeneas was Purcell's first all-sung opera and derives from the English masque tradition. Libretto. Originally based on Nahum Tate's play Brutus of Alba, or The Enchanted Lovers, the opera is likely, at least to some extent, to be allegorical. The prologue refers to the joy of a marriage between 2 monarchs, which could refer to the marriage between William and Mary. In a poem of about 1686, Tate alluded to James II as Aeneas, who was misled by the evil machinations of the sorceress and her witches into abandoning Dido, who symbolizes the British people. The same symbolism may apply to the opera. This explains the addition of the characters of the sorceress and the witches, which do not appear in the original Aeneid. It would be noble, or at least acceptable, for Aeneas to follow the decree of the gods, but not so acceptable for him to be tricked by ill-meaning spirits. Although the opera is a tragedy, there are numerous seemingly lighter scenes, such as the first sailor's song, "Take a boozy short leave of your nymphs on the shore, and silence the morning with vows of returning, though never intending to visit them more." Musicologist Ellen T. Harris considers the callousness and cynicism of the song to underline the moral of the story, that young women should not succumb to the advances and promises of ardent young men. No score in Purcell's hand is extant, and the only 17th-century source is a libretto, possibly from the original performance. The earliest extant score, held in the Bodleian Library, was copied no earlier than 1750, well over 60 years after the opera was composed. No later sources follow the act divisions of the libretto, and the music to the prologue is lost. The prologue, the end of the Act 2, Grove scene, and several dances, were almost certainly lost when the opera was divided into parts to be performed as interludes between the acts of spoken plays in the first decade of the 18th century. The first of the arias to be published separately was Belinda in Orpheus Britannicus. The most famous aria of the work is When I Am Laid in Earth, popularly known as Dido's Lament. Both arias are formed on a lamento ground bass. Dido's Lament has been performed or recorded by artists far from the typical operatic school, such as Closterman, Ainbrun and Jeff Buckley. It has also been transcribed or used in many scores, including the soundtrack to the HBO miniseries Band of Brothers. It is played annually by a military band at the Cenotaph Remembrance Ceremony, which takes place on the Sunday nearest to the 11th of November in London's Whitehall. The music is thought by some to be too simple for Purcell in 1689, but this may simply reflect that the intended performers were school children children. The work is scored for 4 parts, strings and continuo. The fact that the libretto from the Chelsea School performance indicates 2 dances for guitar, the dance Gitters Chaikani in Act 1, and the guitar grounder dance in the Grove scene of Act 2, has led one scholar to suggest that Purcell envisioned a guitar as a primary member of the continuo group for the opera. Music for neither of these dances is extant, and it seems likely that Purcell did not compose them, but rather left them to be improvised by the guitarist. Several editions of the opera have been made and have been provided with a continuo realization, a notable, if rather idiosyncratic edition being that made by Imogen Holst and Benjamin Britten. There are a number of editions with realizations, and the opera's accessibility to amateur performers is a feature that has greatly abetted the growth of its popularity in the latter half of the 20th century. While the prologue's music has been lost and has not been reconstructed, several realizations of the opera include solution to the missing ritornello at the end of the second act. Known to have been part of the score, it is now performed as a dance taken from other, similar works by Purcell, or invented outright in the same vein, to keep the integrity and continuity of the performance. Performance history. Premiere and early revivals. A letter from the Levant merchant Roland Sherman associates Dido and Aeneas with Josias Priest's girls' school in Chelsea, London no later than the summer of 1688. The first performance may have taken place as early as the 1st of December 1687, and evidence suggests that the opera was performed at the school again in 1689. Several scholars have argued that the work was composed for the English court, either for Charles II or for James II. Following the Chelsea performances, the opera was not staged again in Purcell's lifetime. Its next performance was in 1700 as a masque incorporated into an adapted version of Shakespeare's Measure for Measure at Thomas Batterton's Theatre in London. After 1705 it disappeared as a staged work, with only sporadic concert performances, until 1895 when the first staged version in modern times was performed by students of the Royal College of Music at London's Lyceum Theatre to mark the bicentenary of Purcell's death. Dido and Aeneas received its first performance outside England on the 14th of December 1895 in a concert version at the University Society in Dublin. 20th and 21st century performances. Dido and Aeneas premiered in the United States at the Plaza Hotel in New York City on the 10th of February 1923, performed by the girls of the Rosemary School. Although the New York Times noted that considerable liberties had been taken with the score, a concert version with professional musicians organized by the Society of Friends of Music took place on the 13th of January 1924 at the New York City Town Hall, using a score edited by Artur Bodansky, who also conducted the performance. As new critical editions of the score appeared, and with the revival of interest in Baroque music, the number of productions steadily increased. After Jonathan Miller's visit to Bornholm, Denmark, Dido was performed in 2008 at the Ron Theatre. Devon Duggan conducted. Amongst the new productions of the opera in 2009 were those staged by the de Nederlands Opera, the Royal Opera, London, the Divertimento Baroque Opera Company, and Glimmerglass Opera in Cooperstown, New York. The Royal Opera production, which featured contemporary dance by Wayne McGregor, random dance and animated effects by Mark Hatchard, formed part of a double bill with Handel's Acis and Galatea. In 2011 the opera was revived by City Wall Productions and set during World War II. A new Opera North production of the opera opened at Leeds Grand Theatre in February. In 2013 Opera Up Close performed a truncated version in 2011. setting it in an American high school in the 1950s. Adaptations. A version of the opera adapted to modern dance was choreographed by the American Mark Morris, who originally danced both the roles of Dido and the Sorceress. It premiered on the 11th of March 1989 at the Theater in Brussels. It has since been performed many times and was filmed in 1995 by Canadian director Barbara Willis-Sweet, with Morris in the roles of Dido and the Sorceress. Another dance version, choreographed by Sascha Waltz, premiered at the Staatsoper unter den Linden in Berlin on the 29th of January 2005 and opened with the dancers performing underwater in an enormous tank. The production was subsequently seen at the Grand Theatre in Luxembourg, Opéra National de Montpellier, and Sadler's Wells Theatre in London. In both the Morris and the Waltz adaptations, the characters are each portrayed by both a singer and a dancer, with the dancers on stage and the singers performing from the side of the stage and the orchestra pit. Roles. Synopsis. Dido's court. The opera opens with Dido in her court with her attendants. Belinda is trying to cheer up Dido, but Dido is full of sorrow, saying, "Peace, Aeneas." Strange groan. Belinda believes the source of this grief to be the Trojan Aeneas, and suggests that Carthage's troubles could be resolved by a marriage between the two. Dido and Belinda talk for a time. Dido fears that her love will make her a weak monarch, but Belinda and the second woman reassure her that the hero loves as well. Aeneas enters the court, and is at first received coldly by Dido, but she eventually accepts his proposal of marriage. Scene 1. The Cave of the Sorceress. The sorcerer is plotting the destruction of Carthage and its queen, and summons companions to help with evil plans. The plan is to send her trusted elf disguised as Mercury, someone to whom Aeneas will surely listen, to tempt him to leave Dido and sail to Italy. This would leave Dido heartbroken, and she would surely die. The chorus join in with terrible laughter, and the enchantresses decide to conjure up a storm to make Dido and her train leave the grove and return to the palace. When the spell is prepared, the witches vanish in a thunderclap. Scene 2. A grove. During the middle of a hunt, Dido and Aeneas are accompanied by the train. They stop at the grove to take in its beauty. A lot of action is going on, with attendants carrying goods from the hunt and a picnic possibly taking place, and Dido and Aeneas are together within the activity. This is all stopped when Dido hears distant thunder, prompting Belinda to tell the servants to prepare for a return to shelter as soon as possible. As every other character leaves the stage, Aeneas is stopped by the sorceress's elf, who is disguised as Mercury. This pretend Mercury brings the command of Jove that Aeneas is to wait no longer in beginning his task of creating a new Troy on Latin soil. Aeneas consents to the wishes of what he believes of the gods, but is heartbroken that he will have to leave Dido. He then goes off stage to prepare for his departure from Carthage. The harbor at Carthage. Preparations are being made for the departure of the Trojan fleet. The sailors sing a song, which is followed shortly by the sorceress and her companion's sudden appearance. The group is pleased at how well the plan has worked, and the sorceress sings a solo describing her further plans for the destruction of Aeneas on the ocean. All the characters begin to clear the stage after a dance in 3 sections, and then disperse. The palace. Dido and Belinda enter, shocked at Aeneas' disappearance. Dido is distraught and Belinda comforts her. Suddenly Aeneas returns, but Dido is full of fear before Aeneas speaks, and his words only serve to confirm her suspicions. She derides his reasons for leaving, and even when Aeneas says he will defy the gods and not leave Carthage, Dido rejects him for having once thought of leaving her. After Dido forces Aeneas to leave, she states that death must come when he is gone. The opera and Dido's life both slowly come to a conclusion as the Queen of Carthage sings her last aria, "When I am laid in earth," also known as Dido's Lament. The chorus and orchestra then conclude the opera once Dido is dead by ordering the Cupids to scatter roses on her tomb, soft and gentle as her heart. Keep here your watch, and never 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 part. Recordings. The first complete recording of the opera was made by Decca Records in 1935 with Nancy Evans as Dido and Roy Henderson as Aeneas, followed in 1945 by HMV's release with Joan Hammond and Dennis Noble. Kirsten Flagstad, who had sung the role at the Mermaid Theatre in London, recorded it in 1951 for Emmy with Thomas Hemsley as Aeneas. Dido and Aeneas has been recorded many times since the 1960s, with Dido sung by mezzo-sopranos such as Janet Baker, Tatiana Troyanos, Teresa Berganza, and Sophie von Otter and Susan Graham. In addition to Joan Hammond and Kirsten Flagstad, sopranos who have recorded the role include Victoria de Los Angeles, Emma Kirby, Jessie Norman, Catherine Bott, Lynn Dawson, and Evelyn Tubb, beginning with Andrew Parrott's 1981 recording for Chandos with the Taverner Consort and Players. There was an increasing preference for a more genuine period sound. Further recordings by conductors and ensembles using this approach include those by Christopher Hogwood and the Academy of Ancient Music, William Christian Les Arts Florissants, Trevor Pinnock and the English Concert, René Jacobs and the Orchestra of the Age of Enlightenment, Emmanuel Hyman Le Concert d'Estrella and Predrag Gosta and New Trinity Baroque. The Haim recording with Susan Graham as Dido and Ian Bostridge as Aeneas was nominated for the Best Opera Recording in the 2005 Grammy Awards. Several performances of the opera have been filmed and are available on DVD. Most recently, the 2008 performance of the Opéra Comique in Paris, conducted by William Christian, directed by Deborah Warner, and the 2009 performance at London's Royal Opera House, conducted by Christopher Hogwood and directed by Wayne McGregor. The Mark Morris dance version of the opera is also preserved on DVD, as is the dance version by Sasha Waltz.